All right, so this is going to be uh, the last lecture for the course. And before I go into to talking about it, I just want to tell all of you that this has been a very interesting semester. I've been really fortunate to have you as students this semester and to engage with you on our classroom forums. There are things that could have gone better about the semester. From my perspective, I had, deaths in the family that totally horked a bunch of things in the middle of the semester. So I hope you understand, and I understand that all of us have had a very trying year. It's been a very trying year in general. So just vocally, I've said this to you in messages before, but vocally I want to say if there's anything that you need here at the end of the semester, if there are any sorts of accommodations you want to ask for or things that you still need to turn in, let me know, and I will do my best to bend over backwards to make whatever possible to salvage what we can out of this pandemic semester. So, all that said, thanks for taking the class. I'd love to see any of you again in future classes. But we have to talk about engineering right now. Okay. So what we're going to talk about is the question of what the whole purpose of engineering is, which I touched on a little bit early in the class, but I want to circle back around to it. And I want to circle back around to it with the question of justice in the foreground. So in your readings for this week, you had two articles, one of which called Canons Against Canons is a article about social justice in engineering, and the other is an article criticizing that article. So what I want us to think about is this question: whose interests are we about when we work as engineers or as computer scientists? Whose interests are we about when we're in technology? Whose interests are the people at Google or the people working at TikTok or whatever? Whose interest should they be thinking about and safeguarding? So, first of all, I want to say in talking about this that social justice is a very much fought over term. It's a buzzword. It turns some people on and other people off. It makes some people very upset at other people to even, sort of talk about things in these terms. I want to move away from the politicized nature of the terminology, and I want to just think about ordinary notions of justice or fairness. How should people be treated? How do we think about these things? And you may have things in mind like whether people have equal access to education, or you may have things in mind like whether people are passed over in being chosen for jobs because there's some minority candidate that may be slightly less qualified and gets the job. Whatever you have in mind when we're thinking about this, I want to pull back to this notion, which is a notion that maybe we all can agree on in thinking about the framework of, because the founding of America was based on this notion, the notion of no taxation without representation. That there shouldn't be burdens placed on people without them having a say. And that there should be involvement of all competent people in relevant decisions about their life and their welfare. That's the central thing that I think matters when we talk about justice in engineering. Another way of putting this, if it's supposed to benefit me, I should have a say. Because sometimes people try and benefit us or do something that they think is good for us, but it's actually not best for us. Or perhaps they're not even thinking of us. They just say it benefits the community. We're part of the community and we're supposed to be benefited. But that's not always the case. As there was a neighborhood in Detroit, actually about 2 miles from where I'm sitting right now. There was a neighborhood in Detroit that was torn up. Just a freeway was built, cutting straight through it. This is 375. If you've ever been to downtown Detroit, you usually go in on 375. Well, that was just once a major street without all the freeway infrastructure around it. And there was a neighborhood cutting through that. And it was taken down for the good of the public. Right? Who's public? Which public? Right? Think about things like this. Now you can imagine that the people who were most deeply affected by that, which were African Americans in the city of Detroit, the people who were most deeply affected by that had little role or no role in deciding whether it happened. And that's the issue. That was an engineering decision. But it was a social decision, a civic decision, a civil engineer. But was sufficient care shown to those who would be most deeply affected by the decision is one question. And were they dealt with like they were adults who should have a role in decisions that affect them? And that's sort of a central question here. So whether we want to call this social justice, I just want to call it justice, right? Having a say in things that affect you. Now, when we talk about the question of whose interests and whose interests are being protected and how are we protecting them, we need to think about who's involved in the decisions, right? 13% of engineers are women. 26% of computer scientists are women. These are 2018 numbers. How many engineering and computer science decisions affect women? Pretty much all of them. How many women are there in society? Well, about 51%. So clearly a group, not even a minority, clearly a group that we should be thinking about when we make decisions that are, because they're going to be affected by these decisions. But women are less commonly part of the decision-making process. And even when they are part of the decision-making process, there's often a way that the structures within organizations can minimize the role that women have in making decisions. Now, I say there's often a way. There are also situations where women have a great deal of input, or where women are in charge. But to say that that happens is not to say that it generally is the case. And clearly, if we look at these numbers, we can see that representation is not sufficient. Similarly, when we look at the situation of Black and Hispanic men and women, they make up, Hispanic men and women make up 17% of the population in America. They make up 6% of those in engineering. Black men and women make up 13% of the population. They make up 5% of those in engineering professions. A similar discrepancy for white women compared to the U.S. population as well. Now, what does this tell us? Does this tell us that when we hire, we should only hire minorities or women until we get the numbers equal? No, I don't think it tells us that, because we would need the numbers we would need to have a sufficient number of candidates in the pipeline to be able to give those jobs to people who could succeed in them. It may tell us that we have problems, we have a culture problem attracting qualified candidates, people who have these skills in these groups. And we should look at why you would have fewer majors in school in these subjects among Hispanic and black populations, right? And among women. We should look at that. It's not that we need it to be exactly proportional to the population, but when we don't have it proportional to the population, we need to be aware of what voices aren't being represented. Who gets a place at the table is this central question. Who gets a place at the table? Who is deciding these things? And is there a way, even if we don't have representation among the engineering professionals or among the computer science professionals, even if we don't have representation there of various minority groups or women, again, not a minority group, even if we don't have representation among the engineers, can we bring in people, executives? Can we do various sorts of polling or focus groups? Can we get these voices represented in our decision making? Can we do that? Well, there's nothing standing in the way of doing that. Those who are in power are capable of making that happen. And so as you get power, if you get power within your job, you have a responsibility to do so. That's what I would say. And that's what Donna Riley and Yana Lambrinidou argued in your readings. And they went rather beyond that. But they asked the question, what should we be doing in engineering? What is our goal? What is the goal of this profession? And you know, you might say the goal of a doctor is to safeguard health, so doctors should understand a great deal about health. The goal of a lawyer is to create justice, is to provide justice for people. So lawyers should understand something about justice. Well, what is the goal of an engineer? And if we look at the first item of the Code of Ethics, we see it saying that we should hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. Now, what does that mean, to hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public? Well, it seems to say to not harm people, to make sure that there's a maximal amount of safety, health, and welfare to people. But I could do that by staying home and not doing an engineering job. I could do that by eating Cheetos, except it would make me unhealthy. The point is, that can't be the whole goal of engineering, is to keep from harming people or to keep people safe. Then we wouldn't build bridges. We would just make sure that we didn't build bridges so they could never collapse. And people would be like, well, I can't get from point A to point B. And you could say, well, it's not a big deal. You don't need to go there. But engineering is about something more than that. So they ask, what is it about more than that? So this is a quotation they include from Robert Zussman. The technical rationality that is given as the engineer's stock in trade requires the calculation of means for the realization of given ends, but it requires no broad insight into those ends or their consequences. Engineers are trained to be aware of these limitations. Insofar as they do consider ends, they cease to act as engineers. This is not the view that Riley and Lambrinidou see as an inspiring view of what an engineer would be. they shouldn't be just about means of how to accomplish things, not just about technical rationality, but they should think about what the goals are in some way, shape, or form, and pursue goals that fill in the blank, right? What is it that they're aiming at? And you would say benefit the public in some way. Well, what way is that? So they have an aspirational vision of engineering in this article, Canons Against Canons, which sort of it presents itself as something that's sort of pacifistic, and there is something to that. But their argument is much broader than saying don't make cannons, and in fact they don't precisely say something like that even. This aspirational vision for engineering. The goal should be to, first of all, promote the material basis of human well-being or quality of life. And that's something that we've talked about in this class, to make people's lives better, right? To make them have more capacity to do things within their vision of what a good life would be. To facilitate. They add to this, however, social justice, by which they mean things like epistemic humility, understanding your own limitations and seeking out input from others that are not like yourself, promoting opportunity for people who have historically lacked opportunities, and yes, getting rid of the cannons, right? Peace, sort of world peace. And so you may find this inspiring. You may think of it as pie in the sky. You may think that there are dark things behind some of these lofty sounding goals. But something that we should all realize is that there are plenty of moneyed interests around to safeguard the well-off. The well-off people in our society are going to have seats at pretty much every table. So if you're looking to be fair, if you're looking to be just, you can simultaneously have your own viewpoint about what that would involve and recognize that it involves having different people with seats at the table. People who look differently, people who think differently, people who have different fundamental orientations to how the world should be. We can have a certain amount of diversity, both sort of physical diversity and intellectual diversity, while still making decisions together. And I think that's an admirable vision, and that vision should include making a place for historically oppressed groups. Ben Cohen's critique of this, he sees this whole process as a sort of form of silencing those who have unorthodox views, creating a new orthodoxy. So that there will be an orthodoxy that promotes diversity, sort of the, like Walmart says, this is what we stand for. We stand for diversity. We stand for acceptance of people. We stand for this and that. And all of that masks a rejection of people who don't have the same values, who don't have sort of contemporary progressive values. And that's what Ben Cohen sees here. He sees, for one, a suspicion of capitalism, traditional capitalism. He sees socialism around the corner or communism around the corner. Says, well, they don't specifically condemn private industry. They tell engineers that their primary goal should be addressing social problems rather than making money. And he quotes Ed Geringer, saying that incorporating this sort of social justice narrative into engineering sends a message that conservatives are unwelcome. So I think that there's something to this notion that the social justice gravy train can set up this sort of censorship stance where anyone who disagrees should be ignored or set to the side or mocked or treat them the way that you treat people on Twitter, right? I think there's something to this criticism, but it's fascinating to me that when people say that more people should have a seat at the table, that when people say that the goal should be something other than making money, that's portrayed as supporting communism or socialism, or that's portrayed as making conservatives unwelcome. So I think there are people who want to make conservatives unwelcome. But there's also a balance here. If you're a conservative, don't act like saying that there's some other goal than making money is offensive, right? Why would the goal of any profession be to make money? If somebody said that the goal of a doctor was to make money, isn't that offensive to doctors? If people say that the goal of engineering is to maximize money or to provide maximal capital for investors, shouldn't that be offensive to engineers? I mean, maybe I'm crazy here. I'm a philosopher. But that doesn't seem like... That doesn't make conservatives unwelcome. Maybe anyone who goes into a conversation about ethics of engineering and says that it should all be about making money, maybe there would be a part of me that would want to make them feel a little bit unwelcome. But this is all in basic personal relating, in basic virtues. If we go to virtue ethics, right? I think one of the virtues is tolerance. So you recognize that someone has a very different view than you have. And you could try and intimidate them or get them to back down or get them to shut up or ridicule them. Or you could listen to their view and evaluate it and offer criticisms, and that's what I would say. You know, if you think that the shareholder view of the ethics of engineering, which is we should do anything that maximizes money for our shareholders, if you think that that's the right view, then let's have a conversation. Let's have a conversation. Let's listen. Let's think about it. I can live in peace with people who have that view. I just think they're wrong. And if you think the goal of engineering should be to make way for all progressive values and that all engineering should focus on that, we can have a conversation. I think that you're also missing the point that engineering is largely about simple things that will make everybody's lives better, building bridges, stuff like that. Now, when we get into the point where we have to knock down a neighborhood in order to build our bridge, then we have a problem. Then we have to have a conversation. And then I think we need to make sure that the stakeholders are represented. Not just the people who have money in the game, but the people who have lives in the game and their livelihoods are at stake or their homes are at stake. They should be included in the conversation. So I think that we should get beyond partisanship, that partisanship is not the way to think about things. And if this buzzword social justice bothers you, just take off the social part and think about being fair. Right? Think about being fair. And there's going to be different people with different views of what engineering is about. I think that's okay. I personally think that if your view is really to maximize money, that's not a viable view. That's not a viable moral view. No more than if your goal in creating scientific experiments was to maximize money, because you might do all sorts of unethical experiments in order to do that. I think your goal should be something about what engineering contributes to the public good. I think that about every profession. Maybe I'm like silly and idealistic in that way. So I think that the goal of engineering, whatever it will be, it will include this do no harm, promote public welfare thing, but it'll include something else. And I think there can be disagreement about that, but I think that you should think about it, that you should consider it, that you shouldn't go into a profession, you shouldn't go into the rest of your life saying, you know, I don't know why this job is done, but I get money for it. Right? You're not becoming a wage earner. You're becoming an engineer, or you're becoming a computer scientist, or maybe you'll leave the discipline. Maybe you'll be like, hey, I like that philosophy class. I'll go do philosophy instead. Right? But you're not approaching life for just the making of money. This is a means to an end. Maybe it's to go on like all these various vacations or such. But I think that you can accomplish a lot and make a lot of money in engineering professions while doing something very good for the rest of society, very necessary. And that's what I would suggest you approach your further studies with the attitude of.